rain spreads across the rest of Scotland into northern England, North Wales overnight. It also turns breezier in the north, but as well as seeing that rain and the cloud topple in from the northwest, we'll see warmer air arrive, so it's not going to be as cool overnight. Temperatures staying up in the teens in many spots. The brightest conditions for the start of Wednesday will be in the south, and it will stay dry here with sunny spells and a warmer feel. Further north, a lot of cloud and outbreaks of rain continuing for the north and west of Scotland, Northern Ireland, northwest England, with gusty wind making it feel on the cool side. Thursday and Friday, I think, more widely drier and more settled. Still some rain in the far northwest, whilst the southeast turns hot.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
So Chris Pincher resigns in 2017 and gets reappointed. Despite allegations, despite rumours, and Number 10 now admitting they knew many of these, I asked the question, does Boris Johnson have any moral compass at all? We'll examine how can we get better MPs in Parliament. Sir Keir Starmer making a big speech on Brexit today. Does that put the issue to bed or cause more division within the Labour Party? Fuel protests. This time, it's people protesting who want cuts to taxes. And it's July the 4th. It's American Independence Day. Arguably the first Brexit. We'll be joined by Greg Swenson, chairman of Republicans Overseas. But before all of that, let's get the news.
Thanks, Nigel. I'm Ray Addison. Here's the latest from the GB Newsroom. And some breaking news this hour. A gunman has killed 5 people in the US city of Chicago. Police are still looking for the suspect who opened fire during a 4th of July parade in a wealthy suburb. Highland Park reported on its website that 16 people have also been taken to hospital. Video on social media showed people fleeing the scene. Police have now secured a perimeter around the site and will bring you more on this story as it develops. At least one person has died following a gas explosion at a block of flats in Bedford. 3 other people were taken to hospital, with witnesses describing the scene in the Redwood Grove area as an inferno. A person was seen jumping from a second-floor window to escape the blaze. East of England Ambulance Service says 1 man was airlifted with serious leg injuries. 2 other people, including a firefighter, were taken to hospital suffering from smoke inhalation. Resident Baljit Mumon told us what she saw.
I just come back after shopping and driving down the road, and I saw a few people standing at the fence just here behind me, just sort of wondering what's going on here. And then in the distance I could see the flames coming from the roof of the building just behind us. There was so much smoke, lots of flames coming above, and just wondering what on earth has gone on here. And then after speaking to a few of the people that were there, they said they heard a big bang, and it actually shook the house. They felt as though it shook the house as well.
The man accused of shooting dead 3 people at a shopping centre in Copenhagen has been remanded in custody and will undergo a psychiatric evaluation. 2 teenagers were among those killed and 7 others were wounded, 4 of them seriously during the attack yesterday. Danish police say there's no evidence to suggest the incident was terror-related. The Prime Minister was aware of concerns about Chris Pincher's behaviour when he made him Deputy Chief Tory Whip. Downing Street says despite knowing about speculations, Boris Johnson did not think it appropriate to block his appointment. The Prime Minister is alleged to have called him Pincher by name, Pincher by nature. The MP was suspended from the Conservative Party and resigned after claims emerged that he'd groped 2 men last week. 6 new allegations have emerged since, dating back several years, all of which Mr Pincher denies. And EasyJet's Chief Operating Officer, Peter Bellew, has resigned as concerns grow over flight cancellations. The airline is struggling with industry-wide staff shortages that have forced it to cut services, often on the day they're due to depart over the holiday period. EasyJet's CEO says everyone at the airline is focused on delivering reliable services this summer. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now let's get back to Nigel Farage.
Good evening. Well, of course, we had sleaze, did we not? Back to basics and all those disasters in the 1990s when you thought the reputation of politics couldn't possibly fall lower. Then we had the expenses scandal, and now what it seems to be a never-ending list of Conservative, Labour, former SNP MPs, people going to prison, getting in trouble. It is a mess. I have to say, I think right now the reputation of politics is lower than it has simply ever been in modern times. As for Chris Pincher, well, he resigned in 2017. There were a series of allegations made against him. And for some reason, despite everybody in Westminster knowing stories about this guy, for some reason, I guess because he's loyal to Boris Johnson, he gets reappointed until the events in the Carlton Club of last week. And my audience question for you at home is, does Boris Johnson have any moral compass at all? Farage at gbnews.uk, because I don't think he does. I don't think he cares about this stuff. And we don't know whether what Dominic Cummings says is true. You know, Pincher by name, Pincher by nature. I guess it sounds like Boris Johnson. But what we do know is yesterday, Therese Coffey was sent out, Cabinet Minister, to defend Johnson in the press and said he didn't know of any specific allegations. That today has all completely fallen to pieces as Downing Street admit that Johnson did know about the rumours. And indeed, Mrs Johnson, when she worked at Conservative Central Office, was asking questions about Pincher. It is a mess, but it would be wrong, I think, to pin all of this on the Conservative Party. The Labour Party have had their problems, the SNP too, as I've just mentioned. And it all brings into focus, how do we select our members of Parliament? Is there a better way of doing this? Surely there must be. Well, joining me to discuss all of this, having written a big piece about it on the website Unheard this morning, is veteran journalist, broadcaster, writer, even biographer, Michael Crick. And I say that, folks, because he's written a book about me not too long ago.
I think we want to make it clear, an independent book about you, without your cooperation.
I had no cooperation from me whatsoever, but we're still talking, so it can't have been that bad. Michael, you know, you mentioned that more MPs have gone to jail in the last 2 decades for dishonesty over their expenses, for perjury, and for sexual offences than at any time in the last 200 years. Is it that the calibre and quality of MPs is lower than ever, or is it just in the modern day they get caught more easily?
Well, I think there's an element of they get caught more easily and perhaps the courts are more harsh on them. But I think the real problem is the lack of scrutiny, particularly early in the process. And as a journalist, over the years, I've always had what I always say, accidents waiting to happen. You know, Jeffrey Archer was the prime example. How he was ever chosen as the Tory candidate for Mayor of London when all the things that everybody knew about him in his past are all the doubts about his past. Andy Coulson was chosen to be communications director for David Cameron and then in Downing Street when he was so close to the whole of the phone hacking affair. And, of course, eventually he went to jail. How people made those appointment decisions. And, of course, in your own party, you know, you had trouble finding a successor and a whole series of unsuitable subsequent leaders of UKIP. So you weren't exempt either.
Well, it was a hot job.
And in Labour, you had Keith Vaz. I mean, you know, Keith Vaz was elected by MPs as chairman of the Home Affairs Committee when only a few years earlier he'd been suspended for Parliament for not cooperating with a select committee. So, you know, it goes on and on and on. Just lack of judgment by people in power.
When it comes to an MP being selected in a constituency, this is very much down to the head offices now, isn't it? I mean, local democracy doesn't quite have the power that it did.
Well, there's this tension between giving all the local members a vote and head office.
Yes.
And what they try and do is they give the local members a shortlist, and generally the shortlist is structured in such a way that there's only really one choice. I mean, take, you know, I remember going to the selection of Tristram Hunt, who became a Labour MP in 2010, and the shortlist that night was basically him and three people of obviously very low calibre. And that's how you fix a selection.
Yeah.
There's this tension, and the local activists and the local voters more and more and more want local candidates, and the party leaders want people who are going to be potential ministers, people of calibre, people who've had a national track record, maybe done something in a different walk of life. And you've got that clash of cultures, quite apart from the party leaders also trying to ensure that there aren't many dissidents on the backbenches.
Yeah, no, I can see that.
And every selection has got its stories and chicanery and you know, scheming going on behind the scenes, and this gets barely covered by journalists.
And this is leading to
people like... Yeah, and my view is that if perhaps there'd been a bit more attention to some of these people before they became MPs, and people looked into their backgrounds, then some of them, not all of them, probably only a handful, would not have got into Parliament, and you wouldn't have ended up with the scandals that we've got right now. But instead of that, the political parties, including your own, I think, the ones you've led, choose these candidates amid extraordinary secrecy. They don't publish the shortlist. If you publish the shortlist, it would give the public an opportunity to write in and say, well, hang on a moment, I was groped by that guy, or he defrauded me.
But they can't have a say. In America, they have a completely different system of open primaries. These haven't properly been tried here, have they?
No.
But just run us through how an open primary would work.
Well, I mean, the thinking is that actually in a lot of seats, once you're chosen as the candidate, you are effectively the MP because it's a safe seat.
Yeah.
So the open primary would work. Either you give all the voters in a constituency the chance to select the Labour or the Conservative candidate. And indeed, the Conservatives tried this on a few occasions, or they hold a meeting to which members of the public, any member of the public who is a voter, can go along and help choose. And indeed, I took part...
old-fashioned hustings.
Old-fashioned hustings. And I took part in the Conservative selection in Battersea, I remember, about 12 years ago, when I was there for Newsnight and as a local voter. And, man, it was a boring evening, I have to say, because it was very, very difficult to tell the candidates apart. And it didn't really work, because nearly everybody there was clearly a Conservative activist. But in theory, if you were to involve voters in the choice of candidates through one of these two mechanisms, like akin to what they do in America, then it would give more scrutiny. The problem is the cost. The Conservatives at one point were committed to legislating for state funding for something like this. Well, that was one of the first casualties of George Osborne's austerity. And frankly, it's not surprising, really, that that was cut. I'm not sure, really, right now, or indeed for many decades, the state coffers are going to be able to extend to funding.
But this is not
elections.
big money compared to many other things.
No, you're probably talking about 50, depends how you do it, whether you prepaid envelopes or whatever, but 50,000 probably per primary election. But, I mean, they chose Sarah Wollaston, remember the former Conservative MP down in Totnes, and indeed I covered that. And they sent out postal ballots to all the voters. She won. And then she became a great dissident on the Conservative benches. And David Cameron was heard to say, never are we going to hold a primary election ever again.
But final thought, do these open primaries work in America?
Well, I think they do. And it basically gives people a proper choice, because in a lot of states in America, they're either one way or the other, solid Republicans, solid Democrats. So if you get a choice in a if Republicans can take part in a Democrat primary, and the rules vary from place to place, and you have to sort of be a registered supporter of that party, but it does mean there is more choice going on, and it's not left to party fixers all the time to choose candidates. But hey, a hell of a lot of fixing goes on in American politics, probably more than here, and an extraordinary amount goes on in the selection process in British politics as well.
Michael Crick, thank you for those thoughts. Well, the fact is something has to be done. We can't go on like this. It is just dire. And I have to say, I think if there was an election tomorrow, I think people might be surprised just how low the turnout would be. Now, Brexit has been a real problem for all political parties, in particular the Labour Party. I don't think they ever foresaw that millions of families who'd voted for Labour ever since the First World War, in many cases, would become solid Brexiteers and would shift their votes away from the Labour Party. Sir Keir Starmer himself, of course, was very much a Remainer, very much one of those who, in my view, sought to frustrate the Brexit process, has found himself as leader of the Labour Party, not quite sure where to go on this. In fact, today was the first major speech he's made on Brexit, where he's focused on Brexit since he became the Labour leader. And what's he saying? He's saying that a Labour government will not re-enter the European Union, that a Labour government will not re-enter the single market or re-enter the customs union. But he's talking about a whole host of technical changes that would, to quote Sir Keir Starmer, make Brexit work. Does this put the issue to bed with the Red Wall voters? Does it help bring them back to the Labour Party? Or does it actually open up perhaps an internal row with Sadiq Khan and many others? Well, I'm not qualified to comment on that, but Scarlett Maguire, former Labour advisor, certainly is. Scarlett, you've been in and around the Labour Party, the Labour movement, the big figures in the Labour Party for a long, long time. Brexit was a massive problem for them, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Brexit was a massive problem because I mean, Labour has split over Brexit for years. But actually, the problem was that Jeremy Corbyn was pro-Brexit, as we all found out, and Labour was anti-Brexit, and we now have Keir. The interesting thing about Keir is the first time I met him as Brexit Secretary, I'd met him before, he said, I could make Brexit work. And he's always been of that view. Now, there are a lot of pressures on him as Brexit, as Secretary for exiting the European Union. But actually, I mean, I do believe that he thinks that he could make Brexit work in a way that it really isn't working at the moment.
To be honest, Scarlett, he's told us what he won't do. He won't rejoin the single market, the customs union, etc. But when it comes to the list in his speech of what he will do, they're very minor technical points around, agriculture, food, short-term working permits. It's not very radical stuff, is it?
No, because there's a real problem about where we're going to be by the end of this Parliament. I mean, the first big problem is the Northern Ireland Protocol, right? That actually. Boris Johnson signed something. He now says that he shouldn't, or he doesn't say he shouldn't have signed it. I don't know, he signed it in bad. I really don't understand. The thing is that the first thing Keir Starmer's got to do is to make the Northern Ireland Protocol work. And so you make it work, and actually...
Which is very difficult with it. When, let's face it, whatever side of the fence we're on this debate, the EU have been as obstructive as they possibly can be.
Well, I think both sides have been pretty obstructive, and I think we've had megaphone diplomacy, and actually it takes a few technical things. If what you're trying to do is make it work, it's a few technical things like the veterinary stuff, sandwiches.
Yeah.
You can do it.
Things that Keir has talked about today.
Yeah, but the real problem with the Northern Ireland Protocol is of course the unionists are opposed to its very existence. And so actually by doing the megaphone diplomacy that Boris Johnson is doing, is you're pretending it's all about the EU. It's not about the EU. The unionists do not want a border.
I understand that fully, but when you talk about megaphone diplomacy, don't you think that today Keir Starmer had a megaphone to the Red Wall to say, you can come back now, it's safe, we're not going to betray Brexit? Isn't that what today's really all about?
Today is trying to put Brexit to bed, right?
Yeah.
And to say, Brexit is done. I mean, it's not done, but it's there. We're going to accept it. It certainly isn't done. And we actually can make it work. And that's what today is all about.
I get that, but does it unify the Labour Party? Because we've got very senior figures in the party, like Sadiq Khan, saying quite strongly we should rejoin the single market. This is not going to unify Labour within, is it?
I think it's saying this is what we have to do, kids, and let's stop messing about. Let's stop pretending that come the next election things are going to change. I am putting my reputation on the line and saying, if you elect me as Prime Minister, Brexit will be Brexit. The difference between me and Boris Johnson is I'm going to make it work, whereas he is...
What he's really saying is, let's make Brexit boring. Let's try and remove it as a... But that's what he's doing, really, isn't it? Let's try and remove it as a political issue that can cause Labour damage.
The problem is that Brexit can't... I mean, it can be incredibly boring for most people, but in real terms, I mean, the ferry terminals are absolutely furious. They've spent £1 million doing all these import things that haven't come in. We're not taking advantage of the VAT that people were promised.
No, I'm with you on that.
I mean, the real problem is that we're not making... We are where we are. I was a Remainer. Yep. We are where we are. We've got to make it work. And this government is not making it work.
Scarlett, thank you very much indeed. Well, it'll be very interesting to see how that does play in the Red Wall. And I'm going to a Red Wall seat this Thursday with Farage at large. We're going to be in Redcar. That was a really big turn-up when the Tories won that. And we've still got a few seats open, so go to the GB News website if you want to come to Redcar on Thursday. In a moment, protests on our motorways, people being arrested. No, it's not Extinction Rebellion or Insulate Britain. No, this time it's a campaign by people who want big cuts on fuel duty. In a moment, we'll find out what it's all about.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
So much of what is going wrong with this government, so much of it, are unforced errors, things that don't need to go wrong. And I think appointing Pincher is one of those. I asked you, the audience at home, does this Prime Minister have any moral compass at all? Some of your thoughts coming back. Paul says, with Boris lying through his teeth and no decent challenger, the bumbling Labour Party without any genuine manifesto, I fear for my country. Dennis says, how much longer can this clown go on? Jackie says, he never had a moral compass. Linda says, all Boris cares about is Boris. Well, I think a lot of people would probably agree with that, but that wouldn't necessarily make him unique in politics. And Rolf says, cut the messing around, get rid of all career members of Parliament and start now with a new 4-year term only. Lottery-elected members from all the nations. No, I don't think we're going to go for the lottery. But I do think the idea of open primaries, I do think the idea of public scrutiny, as Michael Crick was talking about, and the way they do things in America, I think more wrong-uns would get spotted before they were selected. That, of course, is if we stick with the first-past-the-post system. Now, we have had fuel protests today on the M4, on the M5, the A48, the M54, the A12 in Essex, the M62, and the list goes on as long as your arm. And GB News were out in Essex this morning talking to some of those protesters.
Fuel prices are getting ridiculous now, with over 40% plus tax. So 100 quid worth of fuel, 40 quid of that goes to tax. So I find it a bit ridiculous, as my hobby is to drive, and it's really affecting my bank balance.
It's just getting too much for people. There's businesses going down, you know, people can't take their kids on holidays in this country, you know, it just spoils everything.
The cost of a barrel was this amount of money, but the fuel was there. The cost of a barrel is still that money, and the fuel's up here. So, yeah, it's not right. The everyday person's getting hammered, and it's not right.
Well, the everyday person is getting hammered, and that is absolutely true. I've noticed, actually, of an evening, fewer cars on the road. I think people are using their cars to get to work. They're using their cars if they have to get their kids to school that way. They're using their cars for the weekly shop. They're not going out in the evening in their cars, of that I'm certain. So who's behind these protests? Well, fuel price stand against tax is the rather vague banner that we have been given. Now, I couldn't have been more critical on this show of the actions of Insulate Britain, Extinction Rebellion, you know, gluing themselves to roads and all the rest of it. And to be fair, I've had representatives of them here in the studio, and I've tried to debate this with them. We saw just yesterday at the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, you know, the Just Stop Oil crowd invading the track. So I find it very difficult to support direct action, particularly dangerous direct action, and it's particularly if it does endanger the lives of others. As I understand today, this is not disrupting in the sense of blocking roads, it's going slow on 2 lanes on a motorway and things like that, but a lot more is to be revealed. Well, Howard Cox from the Fair Fuel campaign has been a regular guest on this show as we've talked about the escalating cost, fuel crisis, the divergence of diesel over unleaded and all of those things. And Howard, you know, you've always struck me as being a fairly law-abiding sort of chap. But, I mean, it looks to me like you could be one of the ringleaders behind all of this when, you know, here you are, quoted, Howard Cox, founder of Fair Fuel UK, says he has not organised the protest, but is fully supportive.
I'm supportive of their objectives, Nigel. It's as simple as that. And to be honest, I was assured, and I said I would support it, the organisers, if it was a legal, lawful protest. And that meant not endangering people and not preventing emergency vehicles getting to their calls. Those sorts of things. Let's be fair, though. This is the first time law-abiding citizens have actually, since, if you remember the 2000 times when the truckers blockaded London here, they've got off their backsides and said...
But was this Farmers for Action, the last big fuel protest?
Those sorts
2001
of things.
or there or thereabouts?
When diesel was about 70 pence per litre, halcyon days. But simply, the fact is people are fed up to the back teeth the cost of fuel at the moment, and they are absolutely at the end of their tether. with regarding to actually the cost of fuel.
Who is behind this?
It's actually a social media group. They contacted me about a week ago. That's how I've come into this sort of thing and being interviewed by you today. But I have nothing to do with this protest. I really haven't. But I agree with their objectives to try and cut fuel duty, because we need to cut fuel duty.
Do you think their behaviour today was lawful and was acceptable?
I don't know the full details, and I'm going to be a bit on the fence here. I think it was lawful, provided they didn't actually cause any problems in terms of dangerous issues in terms of safety. The idea they told me that they would actually be blocking only the slow lane of 3-lane motorways.
All right, because it seems to me that a lot of people, when asked about Insulate Britain, Extinction Rebellion, a lot of people answer the way that you answered a moment ago. They say, well, we don't necessarily support their actions, but we support the big picture.
Yeah, but that's the truth, Nigel. That's where I'm sitting.
And the truth of it is that the actions of Extinction Rebellion and Insulate Britain have actually turned people against them.
Absolutely right.
It's not been a success for them at all. It's not going to make an iota of difference to government policy. How are these protests going to make a difference?
Yeah, it's the danger. They're treading a thin line. They could alienate the very people they want on their sides. You're absolutely right, Nigel. But let's get to the actual issue. I'm sorry. The fact is, fuel duties, we got a 25p cut in Germany, we've got a 20p cut in Spain, 17 pence cut in Ireland, and 13 even in France. We've got a 5p cut in fuel duty back in March. It didn't touch the sides. People are in agony out there. They're in pain. The cost of living crisis, and the people just across the way, but over in Westminster, could just one stroke of a pen could cut fuel duty by 20p, and that would help the economy and reduce inflation.
Now, there was a big piece by Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson, a conjoined piece in The Sun on Sunday yesterday, double-page spread. Amazing that it's had no traction, no pick-up at all. Is it that when they say they're going to start cutting taxes, that just no one believes them anymore?
Well, there's no detail in it, was there? There's nothing at all. It's all great words yet again, and I'm working with a lot of backbench MPs and even some cabinet ministers who are saying, Howard, keep protesting the way I do it. I do it objectively. I use data, I use economic data, and I use 1.7 million supporters to contact their MPs. Those are the sorts of things we do. I'm not going to try and interfere with people's lives on a daily basis, but the objectives of those people today, I think, are laudable. The actions may not be.
The oil price is relatively high.
Yeah.
It's been higher.
Yeah.
But it's relatively high. And there are some that say there's a big recession coming. And don't worry, hold on, because in the latter half of this year, prices will drop as a result of the recession, the slowdown in China, etc. And it's all going to be okay. Others of us, myself included, think that the war in Ukraine, the West's struggle against Putin, isn't going quite as well as we were led to believe. That actually sanctions are hurting us in some ways more than they're hurting him. He's found new markets. He's selling more oil and gas to India and China than ever before. The ruble is now higher than it was before the invasion. And if he really wanted to hurt the West, he would just start cutting supplies, wouldn't he, that are coming in to Germany, to Italy and elsewhere. What happens? I mean, JP Morgan over the weekend. Now, I'm not saying we should take this seriously, but JP Morgan suggesting that 190 a barrel for oil, it's 120 odd now, and some even talking about, oil in the hundreds. What happens to the economy if we get there?
We're in a dire strait, and the government can do something about it over here. That's what matters. And of course, the pound's getting weaker because of our impotence,
which pushes import prices up.
Exactly. But the wholesale price in the month of June, for example, fell round about 10 to 12%. But the retail price, what we pay at the pumps, what we fill our cars up, went up by about 10%. There's a 20% swing there. Why is the government not introducing Pump Watch, which I've called with you before, with a watchdog, a pricing watchdog, initially a voluntary, which they sign up voluntarily, the retailers, but if they don't actually follow a fair pricing and transparent pricing process, then we need to put some more teeth into it, like Ofgem and Ofcom.
But we are importing, of course, at least 20% of our diesel from Russian refineries, and that's part of where the squeeze is.
Well, one of the first things that people over there should be talking to other diesel suppliers now and doing deals with them. Wasn't that what we're supposed to do after Brexit?
I thought so, but it doesn't seem to have happened. Howard Cox, thank you for coming in and clearing the air. I will not point the finger of blame at Cox as being the man behind it all. But no, thank you for that, and we'll watch and see where these protests go. We'll also watch and see whether they actually garner any public support, because it certainly hasn't worked in the case of those gluing themselves to roads. Thank you. We'll talk to you again very, very soon. Now, it's a funny old world that we live in, and there are some things out there that, frankly, do drive us mad. But one place for centuries where people in this country have sought solace, one place that is still, I think, very, very much unique to Britain and Ireland is, yes, you've guessed it, the pub. And I've always said that every pub's a parliament. It's in pubs where we talk about who the England football manager should be. It's in pubs in my village where we discuss, is the vicar a Marxist or not? It's in pubs where you can go in with a firm opinion on something and somebody in the corner says, well, have you looked at it like this? And you change your point of view. Pubs are the hub of communities, and certainly in rural England, in small-town England, without them, people's social life is seriously diminished. There's been a trend over the course of the last few years. Cheap booze available in supermarkets. Taxes, again, we're back on taxes, but taxes on drink and on beer in particular over much of the last 20 years going up above the rate of inflation. And pubs have been losing customers. And the pandemic has actually broken the habit of the pub for many people. Many people now just happy to be at home, maybe in the summer, have friends in the garden. So we're now down 7,000 pubs in England and Wales. We're down to 40,000 pubs across those two parts of the United Kingdom. And I think it's a sad thing. And I think our community and society is weaker without it. What can be done to save them? I don't know. But unless government gives some very, very rapid help on business rates, I'm not sure very much. And the allied problem, of course, is the pressure on housing means if you close a pub and turn it into 3 or 4 residences, it's worth quite a lot of money. Golden bricks, as it's known. Now, we don't focus that much on the woke, loopy craze on this show, but I am going to do a What the Farage on the Scout movement. The Scout movement, founded, of course, by the great Lord Baden-Powell, and a very wonderful, worthy organisation. And I see lots and lots of Scouts out in Kent, where I live. They're there with their rucksacks and they're off on night hikes, and some are doing Duke of Edinburgh awards, and I'm all for it. I think it's a great thing. But I'm afraid the Scout Association have now banned the terms falling on deaf ears. Man-made, banned. Dinner ladies, banned. Christian name, banned. Maiden name, banned. Oh, and you can't say Chinese whispers. No, 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 no. You've got to say broken telephone. And the organisation says it's to avoid causing offence to people of all genders, religions, races, and those living with a disability. And what we're really doing, I think, is wrapping teenagers in cotton wool, actually stopping them from having free, open debate so they can work out themselves what's acceptable in society and what's not. I think it's all ridiculous. But I do believe the pendulum is swinging back in one or two other directions, and I haven't given up, and will go on battling for common sense and free speech. Now, today is July the 4th. It's Independence Day in America. It has been marred, I'm sorry to say already, by a shooting in Illinois. We'll discuss that. We'll discuss the significance of July the 4th. Perhaps it was, in many ways, the first Brexit. And we'll talk about where America is now, because from this side of the pond, it's looking very, very divided. I'll be joined by Greg Swenson. He's chairman of Republicans Overseas. All of that in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
It's July the 4th. Yes, it's Independence Day in the USA. It's Talking Pints. I'm joined by Greg Swenson, who was, of course, chairman of Republicans Overseas here in London. And, Greg, it's very good to see you.
Here's to it.
On this great
Happy
American
4th.
Day.
Happy 4th.
Now, of course, it's a public holiday.
That's
Marches, parades, all these amazing things that go on in America on this day. We don't know much about it yet.
Yeah.
But we understand there's been a shooting at a parade somewhere in Illinois. Do you know much about this yet or not?
I don't know the details, but it's in Highland Park, Illinois, which is a beautiful suburb on the North Shore. I lived one town further up than Highland Park. I know the town really well and know a lot of people there. It's absolutely tragic. On July 4th, the kids were getting ready for the parades, and it sounds really horrible. Although I have not seen the
there's
detail.
no detail, but we
nothing
acknowledge
on the shooter, nothing on no details yet.
Now, generally, July the 4th, I mean, right across the States, it's a huge families getting together.
It's fantastic. It's I'd say after Christmas and Thanksgiving, it's the biggest holiday. And Memorial Day is more solemn. You're honoring veterans and those who sacrificed. 4th of July is completely celebratory.
Well, let's be honest.
And it's another day off in the summer.
Is getting rid of King George III and the Brits, isn't it?
It was a rebellion against Parliament and King George III. I mean,
violent rebellion.
It was the first Brexit. Yeah, it was really. Look, and it's interesting, but I remind people often that it was the Declaration of Independence. This beautiful document was written by Englishmen and based on a lot of history, based on some of the things that were written before the Declaration, the famous Declaration, I think it was in 1689, the English Declaration, thank you. And John Locke was a massive influence, the English political philosopher.
Thomas
Paine wrote Common Sense.
Yes.
He had just moved to America. So here was this Englishman, new in town, and decided this is a better model.
Then when you go on to the formation of the American Constitution, you take a heck of a lot from Magna Carta.
Absolutely, yeah.
I went to see one of the original copies of that last Thursday up in Lincoln,
great.
which is a very I'd never done it before, a very special thing to do. So you take a heck of a lot from us, even though you forcibly remove us.
Yes.
We do leave something behind.
It's amazing that a band of farmers decided to pick up some muskets and take on, at that time, the greatest military that had ever been assembled.
The Redcoats.
Because they raised their taxes. And they said, no, this is not going to happen. So it's a great story about the American spirit.
Taxation without representation.
That's right.
And these are phrases that echo down the centuries, aren't they?
And of course you had, the great philosophers here at the time that were actually supporting the colonies.
Yeah.
And, you mentioned Thomas Paine. Common Sense was the best-selling book in American history after the Bible, adjusted for population. And prior to that, most Americans didn't want to leave. They wanted to be subjects of the king. They wanted to stay British subjects. And after Thomas Paine circulated that bestseller, Common Sense, everybody kind of bought into it. And it really changed it. And here was an Englishman convincing the colonists.
But it wasn't an easy birth, was it?
No.
Because there was no common currency across what was America in those days. And you're kind of 60, 70 years in, and you have one of the bloodiest civil wars that's been known to man. I mean, it wasn't an easy birth, was it?
It never is, but it shows that the founders and the great documents, again, written by basically Englishmen, were built to survive. And you know, they knew there would be hiccups. They knew that even when they wrote those documents, they knew that the slavery thing was going to rear its ugly head. That wasn't going away. But yet the institutions that were built to survive, and they work.
And
still to this
the Constitution, still the Constitution, is, and of course it gets its amendments from time to time, but still the Constitution means a heck of a lot. And do you think that's
really
being
does.
taught? Is that being taught in American schools
Not
in the way
enough.
perhaps it was when you were at school?
No, not enough. And I think what we have to stop teaching our children garbage, you know, CRT and pronoun choices and all this insanity, and get back to teaching civics and history. That's really much more important.
Because America is not a national democracy, is it? It's a republic.
No, it's a republic, yeah.
Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, it just means that it's, you know, Tocqueville, and I think Jefferson used it often, said, beware the tyranny of the majority. You know, it wasn't built to be a referendum. And because what if the majority was mistreating minorities?
So the
small states should have
protection against the bigger states. That's basically how it works.
It was originally designed to make sure that the southern states didn't have too much power. They wanted to make sure there was equal number of votes, essentially, from the north and the south. But it also meant smaller western. They wanted to encourage the frontier, that the western states that weren't going to be populated very much, and to this day really aren't. You know,
when you fly over in daytime, when you fly out over the Midwest, over the Rockies, and I remember flying over Utah late spring. I mean, there's no habitation for hundreds of square miles.
It's fantastic. It's part of the culture. It's part of the fabric. And they didn't want the majority, where let's say people, and we see it today, people in Washington and New York and LA, you surely don't want them to ignore the will of the people that live in different places.
Flyover states.
Flyover land,
the deplorables.
Right? And the deplorables, And this is, but it was really built to protect minorities, whatever those minorities might be, whether they're racial or ethnic minorities or regional minorities, farmers versus city people. So it was really important to make sure that there was protection.
But the Indians
so it was
got
a
pretty
republic.
bad deal, didn't they?
They got a bad deal. Yeah, by the English.
You blame us for that, are you?
The Americans kept that mistreatment going for a long time. So there's no doubt. I mean, look, it's not a perfect country. And as you know, Churchill has often said, you know, it's the best. You know, it's the best of the only options, right? So, you know, look, it's flawed. It's an imperfect country, but it's the greatest country in the world, and always will be.
It emerges, doesn't it? You know, when you think about it, the Civil War's over, things have settled down. America is beginning to have a presence on the world stage, but only very gently. Suddenly, World War I, World War II, and those two events drive America into being the global superpower.
Yes, it was the end of empire for the United Kingdom, unfortunately. The pound was replaced by the dollar. The Americans became, you know, the global superpower, leading the Western democracies. Yeah, I mean, it took a while. I think, you know, but I think that's why I mentioned the founders and the documents are timeless. Knowing there'd be some bumps in the road, knowing that it was a vast, you know, expansion. You know, it's 13 states when this whole thing started.
The whole thing was an experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet, in spite of all the bumps in the road, the founders and the documents survive, and it's important to respect that. And look what happened 250 years later.
Under the rule of law and via the Constitution. And I just don't want today for us to be party political, particularly. I think it's not the right day for that. We're talking about America today, and of course there've always been different shades of opinion.
Sure.
But Greg, I don't know. It does seem to me that some of the divisions in America now, almost hatreds. Not I disagree with you.
Right.
You know, next Tuesday we're going to go and sort this out at the ballot box. But I disagree with, and I hate you.
Yeah.
How worried are you about American cities, about law and order, about this intolerance?
It needs to be fixed. And I think
Can it be fixed?
Yes, it can be fixed. The cavalry's around the corner, first of all. I mean, you're going, again, we don't have to get in too much into the red-blue, but you're going to see a massive landslide election in November in the midterms.
In the midterms.
And that's setting up very nicely for 2024. We need to get back to a bit of law and order. We don't need necessarily new laws. We need to enforce the laws that we have. And I'm all for new laws if they make sense, but right now, this is a two-part problem. One is we're wasting time and energy on silliness, on teaching children silly things in school and ignoring the important things.
But social
also,
media plays a big role in
yeah,
this too.
it does.
I mean, it isn't just, I agree with you on education, and we've got the similar problems here. But actually, the power of those big tech companies.
And so there's some things that need to be fixed. But if you look at what's important to Americans, it's not what the Twitter mob is saying. It's not what people in Washington, the salons of Georgetown or New York or LA or San Francisco, it's really not what they think because they're feeding into the same mob. It's what the rest of the country, it's what flyover land thinks. And they actually do have a view. And that's what you're going to see in November, and you'll see it again in 2024. 2020 was an aberration because you had COVID, you had all these different reasons, but it's a center-right country, and I think the flaw right now is, and I'm already seeing it flip. So that's why I'm optimistic, Nigel, and I'm confident. The DA, his name was Chesa Bodine, probably butchered it, in San Francisco. He was one of these George Soros-endorsed district attorneys, which are controlling New York, Chicago, L.A., San Francisco. He was recalled.
I couldn't keep you off politics for longer.
Yeah, sorry. He was recalled. There was a recall election.
Yeah.
And this is in San Francisco, which is basically 90% Democrat. And it's not Democrat, it's progressive left Democrat.
Yeah.
He was recalled. He didn't just lose a re-election. He was called out of office. 60% of San Franciscans voted to recall him, 60 to 40. That's a massive move. And what that tells me is that the people, red or blue, Republican or Democrat, San Francisco, which is all Democrat, basically said enough.
So there's a safety mechanism. There are safety mechanisms here. Well, I pray that's right.
Right.
Greg, now here you are, all-American patriot, deeply into your American history, but you're living in London.
Yes.
Is that because the business opportunities are great here, or is it because culturally it sort of feels like home?
Well, it's a little bit of both. It's a great place. It's our number one partner in terms of foreign direct investment. It's our number one partner in terms of strategic military. Of course, it's a natural place for Americans. That's why there are so many American expats here. I also do a lot of business in Africa, and this is the financial capital of Africa. So there are many reasons to be here.
But US, I mean, Biden has a bit of a problem with us. It's the Irish thing that I think he's misread, frankly, to some degree. But do you think our relations are as good as they ever have been? Or have they deteriorated a bit?
I think it's just a little speed bump, Nigel. It is a speed bump. It will be back. Mike Pompeo was in town today making the rounds. It was fantastic. No, this relationship is long-term. And so there is a bump in the road now.
Yeah, and presidents come, presidents go, prime ministers come, prime ministers go. But that relationship and the cultural connection, the cultural connection is incredible. I think when you look at music, art, literature, we're kind of all listening to, watching the same things. The only thing you haven't got is cricket, of course, which is because you left us.
That's why we have baseball.
Yeah, you left us all those years ago. So living in London, I mean, is this you long-term, staying here in London?
Yeah, I love it. My business is here. I love the political scene. I love doing this kind of stuff. My wife loves it here, Mary Ellen. So she's thrilled. So yeah, this is home. This is home for sure. And we get back to the States a lot. Both of our children live in the U.S., New York and Chicago. So
and now we can all fly again.
Yeah, at 25% higher prices. Yeah.
Well, I guess fuel has gone up.
Fuel has doubled. It's a tough July 4th weekend for a lot of people. Air travel's up 25%. Fuel's up 100% since Biden took office. Sorry. Hamburger meat 36%, chicken 33%, lemonade 22%. Fireworks 35%.
Wow.
This is a tough
fireworks. I mean, July the 4th. You need your fireworks.
Exactly.
Over there.
It's crazy. So I think this will be a belt tightening holiday weekend. I think help is around the corner. I hope we can fix things, and we will.
Similar problems here.
Very similar, and the same causes actually. It's just that in America you'd expect this from a left-leaning or a Democratic administration. I was hoping that you wouldn't get it from a so-called conservative administration here in the UK.
These people aren't conservative, are they?
No, because they've governed as bad or worse than Biden. You know, Biden tried to get the tax on profits through in America and knew he couldn't get it passed. But, you know, Boris and Rishi have done it.
We're putting taxes up. Great.
Windfall taxes never work.
Well, I have to say, I would argue that very strongly, and you put a windfall tax on one industry, and who's to say it's not another industry next? Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Talking Butts. I know you appear on GB News quite regularly over the course of our first year, and happy July the 4th.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much indeed. OK, it's that time of the show. It's Barrage the Farage. You have sent your questions in. I have not pre-read them. Here goes. Ruth asks, Nigel, what do you think of Nadine Dorries' new powers to censor the internet and kill free speech? I tell you what, I wish Nadine Dorries knew a little bit more about rugby. I mean, there she is at a rugby league dinner, and she starts talking about Johnny Wilkinson of Rugby Union. That was very embarrassing indeed. Look, I am genuinely quite worried about the online harms bill. I completely get the idea. We don't want the internet to be the Wild West, but I think they're going the wrong way about it, as indeed this government is in so many other directions. Andrew asks me, if Starmer has to resign over Beergate, who will take his place? Goodness only knows. Maybe somebody even less boring than Starmer, but maybe boring his way to number 10 in a coalition with others is what he seeks to do. I really don't know. Certainly, he's tried to make Brexit today as boring as he possibly can in the hope that nobody ever talks about it again. And finally, Robert asks me, the royal family are costing this country over £100 million a year. The Queen and Prince William may be beneficial, but do you think the rest of them are worth it? Well, I think the royal family has good periods and the royal family has bad periods. I was struck, actually, on the Sunday of the Jubilee. We went up to the West Midlands, GB News, broadcasting live from a big sort of street event. And it was, speaking of younger people, was very, very interesting. Lots of younger people with huge respect for the Queen and what she'd done for the country, but pretty sceptical and pretty cynical about the rest of them. We'll see. The Queen is looking in rude health. She had a slight problem with her hip. She now looks magnificent. She's clearly going to live for many, many, many years to come. At least I jolly well hope so. Well, it's over and out from me until tomorrow at 7 o'clock. But joining me here in the studio is, yes, it's Mark Stein.
Hey, Nigel, that thing, there are arguments for republics and there are arguments for monarchy, but the money is the least of it. The monarchy is actually a bargain compared to whatever you'd put in its place money-wise.
Yes, and we've had good kings and bad kings and queens over the years, but haven't we been lucky with Elizabeth?
Oh, no, absolutely. Fantastic. She's held it together. She was born just as all the great crowned heads of Europe crumbled, and she defied the odds. Defied the odds.
Quite extraordinary. How are you enjoying GB News?
I love GB News, Nigel. I basically look at it. I'm just like closing out the night after you've done your thing, but it's an incredible success. And I'd forgotten just how stultifying the whole BBC, ITV, Sky mainstream is. So it's fabulous to have an alternative.
I tell you what, we're not that. We have open, free debate on a big range of subjects. And I know you've been looking at vaccine harms and all the rest of it. But listen, I'm done. Over to you.
Yeah.
What's happening this evening?
Great to see you. I'll see if I can come up with something. The Mark Stein Show, we've got grooming gangs. We've got the terrible state of the police. And we have Mike Batt for some jolly music too, just as a palate cleanser for all the hell we're living through. That's all coming up after the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Showers easing overnight, fine for a time across Scotland, Northern England, Northern Ireland. on Tuesday, but more rain turns up later in the day. The weather staying changeable in the north, drier further south as a ridge of high pressure begins to influence things a bit more this week. And so for some southern areas, no rain expected at all through the week, but there are showers to come for the north, and further showers are expected for northern and western Scotland, Northern Ireland, northwest England, North Wales overnight. They will eventually mainly affect, say, northwest facing coasts with drier and clearer spells inland, and a cool night to come. Temperatures dipping in the single figures in some spots. But a bright start for the south and the east, and actually a fine day for much of Scotland and northern England as well, and into the Midlands we'll see some sunny spells.